awesome to be with all of you today. That's a cool list of locations that we're all joining each other from today. So I'm really excited for our conversation. Devin mentioned some of those recurring norms for NC Live webinars. I would add a norm today that I am very happy to be interrupted in the chat. If you have a question, a thought, something you think I might be missing, drop it in there. There will be 4 or 5 little pit stops that we'll make throughout the presentation where we'll take some time to look at those chat questions, and I'll ask you some more specific questions. But I'm kind of just interested in the personal side of personal computing here. So the premise of this talk is essentially that we find ourselves on the beginning of a new era of computing, having not really looked very hard at the one we're coming out of. We are very thoroughly deep in the personal computing era. I think it's really hard to make a case that personal computing didn't happen. We're probably in the 2nd or 3rd iteration of it at this point. And AI seems like it kind of dropped out of a spaceship onto us. I don't remember my grandmother asking me questions about AI every time I spoke to her like 2 or 3 years ago, like now. And so it didn't really come out of nowhere, though. And so we'll try to ground ourselves in this experience we've all been having with computing over our lifetimes, our professional, our personal lifetimes, and try to really ground where we are in this moment, where we can all feel something changing, but we're not quite sure what it is. So this is a talk about using computers as vehicles for personal and professional creativity. I'm Colin Keenan. I'm the Experiential Learning Services Librarian at NC State University Libraries. A little bit about what I do in that role before we move very far away from some of what I do in that role. I work within what we call our studios, which are our experiential learning spaces. They're largely defined by being student-staffed spaces with lots of full-time staff support around tech consultations, instruction, and integrations of both curricular and non-curricular instruction with these topics. And we're very interested in the philosophy of maker spaces, the idea of learning by doing, and we extend that out into digital media production, what we call virtual reality production, which is everything from human-computer interaction to game design, increasingly gameplay. I think we have the best esports space in the state now, and we're about to build another one. We're very proud of the program we're building in service of our communities of gamers and game developers on campus. And we also are increasingly in the world of showcase spaces, so doing museum exhibition analogous work of stories about campus life and the people who spend their time on campus here. I do lots of things outside of iStudio's appointment, though. I also am kind of a social butterfly doing technology stuff around the libraries. I get to work with our colleagues in our newly renamed core collections and research engagement department. And they are the custodians of the high-tech spaces. So these are multimedia spaces that are not staffed for regular hours. They're more around event support and pop-up programming. And we have some really awesome spaces. I won't really give you the whole spiel about our wonderful spaces, but my email is right there on the page. I love getting emails from people. I have that Noam Chomsky disease where I cannot let somebody email me and not respond to them. And so like drop in my email inbox, there's one there. And then a little bit later in the presentation, I'm going to share some information if you have kind of non-libraries questions that fall more into my other life away from NC State. But some examples of really cool things we're building here on that page, and some examples of other capacities that I have on campus. I think I just kind of want to reflect that I'm coming mostly from virtual reality production over the last 7 years or so, but my real first love is statistics, mathematics, natural sciences, and ostensibly the technologies that have gone on to become what we now call artificial intelligence pretty broadly. So these are a bunch of images I had to go very deep into my email inbox to find from 12 years ago or something like that. But I'm coming from a career in agriculture, which itself was grounded mostly in statistical modeling and mathematics, real-time observation, what you do with those observations once you can put them into a computer. My story of how I got online, put very shortly, is that in the summer of 1998, I learned that the Pokemon company was going to be releasing English language Pokemon cards in North America. And I called every trading card store in the phone book, and none of them knew what I was talking about. And so I needed to get online to find more people to bug on the phone. I did not know that those cards were not releasing for 6 more months. And so no one knew what I was talking about for that reason. But in the meantime, while I waited, I learned how to do some basic web development. By like 2000, I had a GeoCities website that was dedicated to my beloved Toronto Raptors. I'm sure most people who were checking that site for their Raptor news did not know a 10-year-old was running it. I was in the years after that doing a lot of like P2P file sharing, web development forums, computer development enthusiast forums. I was very active in early Wikipedia. When I was in community college in 2008, I think I read a book of the best science writing in the world in 2007. It introduced me to probabilistic models and neural networks. It's just like an opportune, picked a book up off a shelf, only had 20 minutes and read about something that sort of changed my brain forever. I think that's probably the way I imagine most people learn things, is moments of enthusiasm that really capture them and motivate them to move towards further knowledge. I have some list of things I did with AI in the early days of these kinds of versions of these technologies. I don't think it's terribly interesting, but just so you kind of see where I'm coming from in terms of technologies I worked with early and I've worked with lately. Obviously, not all of that really fits within libraries work, and I have a life of making stuff outside of the libraries here locally in Raleigh, engaged with some local museums, was involved in a really big museum opening here in Raleigh for the Dueling Dinosaurs exhibit earlier this year, and doing lots of kind of general technology making in that capacity as well. And there's a company that my friends and I own, kind of spun out of all the stuff we've been making with computers for a long time, doing general design and project planning, media technology research, and interaction development. So I get a lot of opportunities to make stuff. I'm really excited to talk to y'all about the tools that I'm most excited about right now and that I see kind of changing the most in front of our eyes. So I'm gonna take a deep breath here in case anyone has any of those interruptions that I invited.
We have one question from the chat. Is there a way to maximize the slide view a little bit?
Did that help?
No, it made it just like a portion of the screen, it looks like. If you could maybe zoom out slightly. It might be the presenter view, but
Oh,
let's
yeah.
see.
Yeah, let me kill my presenter view. I'm glad somebody said something. That help?
Let me see. That's better? Okay,
Cool.
awesome.
All right, guys. Now I have an excuse for why I don't know what I'm talking about. Cool. So my two positions on the screen there, I'd invite anyone who's on this call or is seeing this video afterwards to reach out to me via either of those avenues. My library's email, pretty easy to find. We have a contact form on the MTR Magic Key site if y'all are building things that you'd like our input on or anything like that. So something that surprised me, suddenly there's a cliche AI hype talk format, right? I think we all have been at a conference or a seminar in the last year here where the AI talk is essentially an advocacy talk, or it feels a lot like a sales pitch. I made this image using Midjourney here because I'm always very interested that all the furniture choices on these stages are exactly alike. And usually these talks fall into these tropes of buzzing around like a bit of a maniac, showing a million different windows on your machine and opening up a coding window and showing how you can code a website that might not be very good, but you get the idea and it only took 5 minutes. And again, it's not very good. Or taking an idea that nobody in the audience would really be that enthusiastic about and showing how AI makes that thing possible. And it really countervails like what I find exciting about making things and the motivations that most people have towards making things or wanting to utilize these technologies. So I'll just call out right now that my goal is definitely to avoid those tropes a little bit throughout this talk. It's one of the reasons I'd really invite anyone to interrupt me. There's very well, I would imagine every single thing I talk about over the course of this time, one of the people who see this video will know more about it than I do. And hopefully we can kind of roll that big ball of wax together and all benefit from it. I also think that AI's emergence is a lot more emotional than we let on. I constantly hear like these two emotions kind of cited of how people feel about AI, that either you're excited and enthused by it or you're like afraid. And I don't really think those are the full range of emotions that people would reasonably have around AI. I think there's probably a sense of loss. Like lots of people really like the things they do in their work. And sometimes when the terrain changes around us, those functions might suddenly not fall within the work we're doing, or we're being asked to create more value with the same resources and just better tools. We're being asked to be experts in tools before we get an opportunity to really feel any benefit from them. And, you know, those might be capitalism problems. I don't know if they all are. I think some of them are probably just like problems with our relationship with our work and the way we talk about the advancement of time and how we should all just be ready for constant change. But I totally just want to call out, like, I think that these are societal conversations and they're social conversations, probably more than they're professional and technology conversations. But within this talk, it'll at times probably feel like I'm getting sucked into the vortex of talking about these as workplace technologies, but they really are only workplace technologies to the degree that the internet was a workplace technology. I think early days, sure, people put down the web browser at 5:01 p.m., but I think it's kind of well documented that when people aren't working now, internet usage actually goes up. The eternal summer phenomenon from Web 1.0, if you're familiar with that. So I want to acknowledge kind of that emotional conversation there. Okay, this is our first opportunity. I'd really like to hear from y'all in the chat. I'm always a question I will ask anyone who's my senior is, when did you get online? Like, what was your first experience with the internet? What did that feel like? As much as I remember Web 1.0, I don't remember a world before it. And so when was the first time a computer really surprised you or really impressed you? I'm reading some of these comments as they come in here. Some references back near the punch card era. The live chat, yeah, the instant messenger moment, I often think is a little forgotten in our recollection. Everyone, because of social media and where it went, remembers MySpace, even if they never used it, but they forget these IRC channels and a lot of instant AIM. Yeah, mention of Eliza. We'll hear more about Eliza as time goes on here. Yeah, the first White House website. I think the archived version might have, some people were mourning that it temporarily went down recently, along with that beloved Space Jam website. Cool. Well, thank you for all your input there, everybody. And please continue to chime in with those as you go along. I'm really looking forward to reading the chat after our conversation today when I get a little more time to digest all of it. So we're already seeing some like social phenomenon that we didn't really see on the other side of widespread availability of language models. And I'm putting a pin in kind of that, what are we talking about when we say AI? I'd like to keep our usage of that term as broad as possible until a little later in this conversation, because I think it's the vagueness of how people are using that term is really inherent to how people are talking about these technologies. So these secret cyborgs, which is a term I'm borrowing from Ethan Malik, and I'm sure I'm borrowing a lot of other stuff from Ethan Malik in this conversation as well, by the way. He has a really excellent blog that I think is very widely circulated called One Useful Thing. He had a great post this morning about the differences between the new Siri rollout and the new ChatGPT voice mode, and how they're similar and different, and there are different objectives there. I thought it was very informative. But we have these coworkers, kind of, and friends and family, and maybe it's us. I know this has definitely been me in moments, using language models really systemically across their entire lives, maybe across their entire professional lives, but probably most early adopters are using these to look up recipes as well as to write emails and things like that. And the issue isn't so much that there's something immoral or illegal or kind of inherently wrong about using these tools. It's that we don't really have clear rules yet, right? And these cyborgs have these legitimate motivations to hide their AI use or to kind of hide it by omission within organizations. Organizations might have a blanket ban on the technology that no one's enforcing. They might have an kind of inherent bias against it. The employee might not want to raise the issue or talk to their boss anyway about most things, let alone this topic. There's fears that you're training your replacement when you point out ways that language models can make your job easier. There's fears that you are relocating yourself organizationally into some other cluster. Maybe you wrote a great web app using ChatGPT, and you don't really want anyone to start thinking of you as an app developer because you don't really want to do that work. These are all like legitimate emotional reasons to do this. And I also think that people have completely legitimate reasons to feel like a loss of trust around these conversations. It's almost like being at a dinner table and knowing that the table next to you is listening. Like it really psychically alters the conversation. You start moderating yourself differently. You don't really think of those replies that are coming from your colleague the same way anymore. And there's academic studies that show that satisfaction with written responses decrease sharply when there's an understanding that there's any aid whatsoever towards that communication. Even communications going through translators have inherently like a loss of trust, not from the change in the text, but from knowing that the person is using a tool. There's lots of interesting like double-blind studies on that. So I have some standards for how I use AI in like what I would call a collegial way. And I'm very open to changing these as time goes on. I will be very disappointed with myself if I'm using these tools in the same way 5 years from now. So I think the first is consent. If someone's private data, likeness, image, anything like that is going to interact with AI analysis, they should be a participant in that process. They should know that that process is happening. We've just gone through another gate here where not all large language models will be running in the cloud. They can run locally on devices with really high performance without a web connection. After Meta's release last week, I'd imagine they'll be followed there throughout the rest of the year by lots of other local deployments. So the idea that your data is passing through that kind of algorithm is something you should probably know from a collegial. It's not a legal requirement, but it's collegial. Being transparent about your AI use. I'll have a slide at the end of this presentation pointing out some places I used AI throughout it. I really find myself having this conversation with students a lot. Your name going on the document is your acknowledgement that you are approving everything that is in that document. And in the past, we've been clouded by conversations of like authorship equity or plagiarism, and it's that you're cheating the person who's done that work out of their credit. But there's also kind of a buck stops here sort of an analogy to like working on a job site where sure the apprentice did that portion of the weld, but when you sign off on it as the site supervisor, you have inherited some of the responsibility for that. And I think there's some legal cases that people may have been following last year around using bad legal arguments or illegitimate legal citations and putting your name on it makes you the author of those statements, whether or not your phone spit out bad information at you. And finally, documentation is something that I'll talk about a little bit later on. My biggest change to the way I do work in the last 3 years is at every opportunity building the process of documentation into the creation process. Language models especially, but kind of all generative AI, they are machines that are manufacturing thought, right? They're like semiotic machines. And if someone was to turn off your computer or wipe the computer or delete your chat log or whatever, the unique thought wasn't inherently destroyed there. Your documentation of it is in some forms the product. So I like have sort of an analogy in my mind of like harvest and storage there, that you're kind of laboring towards an intellectual product and getting it down on paper. Like we're all probably familiar with this concept of the idea that got away from you. Getting it down on paper is the process of actually building something that's ratcheting forward towards value. These are quick slides, but they are probably some of the best things I've read. Sorry, I didn't write these. Some of the best things I've read in the last year. This team from the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction is doing really awesome work on their AI guidelines. If you do any instructional work, wherever you are in the country, in the world, I think this is a document worth reading. It deals with some of those when to use AI, when not to use AI, both from an instructor side and a student side. And reading both of those perspectives has really informed just as a person going through the world. Like, I think as adults, we all probably need to have our own personal decisions we've made about our comfort of AI technology in our lives. And that probably needs to be sort of a two-way street in the way that social media usage has become a set of norms that we didn't have 15 years ago that we have now. But these folks, I don't know, if you're going to screen cap one slide on this presentation, like go follow all these people on LinkedIn. They're awesome. I learn a ton from all of these people all the time. Cool. So here's another breaking point. Is this a familiar paradigm? Is this a familiar pickle that y'all are finding yourself stuck in? Have you had in your personal or professional life difficult or uncomfortable moments where you weren't on the same page about AI usage with someone? Do y'all have any personal rules you're following? My wife and I had to have a conversation earlier this year because I've started wearing a computer on my face like a lot more often than even in my VR heyday I was doing. And we both love being able to capture moments and see something cool on a walk and immediately have a photo of it. But we have some cues on letting each other know when we're recording things while we're walking around, or whether we're talking to each other on the phone. And it's just norms that, you know, we've known each other for 15 years, and they're just new things we have to build into the way in certain circumstances we talk to each other. And it's just the process of having that conversation was really informative to me, I thought. Yeah, and what's interesting about some of this is it even goes beyond like policy, right? It almost falls between like Devin mentioned, the how we have some rules for how we're interacting with each other within this call. It falls just as much there as it does like rules within a workplace around how equipment is used, who can use what equipment when, right? It's sort of between those spaces. Yeah, Autumn did a really good job of transitioning to the next part of our conversation here. The understanding of the abilities and the implications is really difficult because it's like trying to get somebody acclimated, like to take their first steps, but you're on one of those like airport walkway things and the ground is constantly moving under you. And some people are like mad that you're walking past them and some people are just standing still. We're like, none of us are on the same page right now. It doesn't help that these are like tools that are shifting really constantly, right? So this is my speed run portion of the talk. This is where I really feel like we do ourselves a disservice sometimes by not examining recent history with as much rigor as we probably should. Consumer history, consumer electronics history, I've always been a little frustrated by the lack of fidelity in some of those conversations. So I'm going to try to run through the first 60 years of AI here as best I can. And Apologies, I do want my speaker's notes for the sake of accuracy in this portion of the talk, because I wouldn't want to get some names wrong and things like that. But okay. So this is the slide where we talk about that label of artificial intelligence and whether artificial intelligence is even like a philosophically possible thing, whether intelligence itself is human. And I don't think those semantic arguments are getting resolved anytime soon. I just am coming out of a long period of working in virtual reality. Like 15% of Twitter conversation back when Twitter was a usable website about VR was like, oh, is this really VR? Like, is this actually augmented reality? Is this actually mixed reality? And I eventually just had to tap out of ever having that conversation again. So I think artificial intelligence is going the same way. On one hand, these are all just algorithms that, given sufficient time and enough paper, you could perform them with a pencil on paper. But like, come on, there's like something emergent here, right? And the more definitive question is whether any of this is particularly new, and where the ultimate utility is going to arrive from with these technologies. So AI as a concept and a field of study predates the era of personal computing by several decades. This slide has a few historical points to set that context for our discussion. So firstly, transformational grammar, which is like the foundation of natural language processing theory, and generative grammar was actually introduced in Principia Mathematica around 1910. That's the Bertrand Russell book. He does have a co-author whose name I'm blanking on there, who always has like that Engels effect of never getting cited as the author. But institutions like Carnegie Mellon and Stanford and MIT all had established AI laboratories that were like fully staffed with full faculty staffing by the mid 60s. Carnegie Mellon was actually first across the post there. They're very proud of that history, and their libraries do an amazing job in their archives of showing a lot of that history. I really enjoyed spending some time with those pages in the last couple of days here. So this is 15, 20 years before like widespread release of Apple II or the IBM PC, which are like two kind of landmark moments in personal computing. And those early AI research efforts included experiments in machine learning, robotics, and natural language processing, with natural language processing definitely advancing the most earliest. So there's a few images on this slide that show this era. But it's important to recognize that AI's development has been a really long iterative process, and that its early days are very deeply rooted in academic and research institutions, and their relationship with defense as well. And that's an interesting paradigm shift we've seen here in the last 10 years, is how universities are out of that loop in some capacities, and it's a much more privatized effort. I think it has a lot of the context of our conversations have to do with that. But like, actually, what the heck is AI, right? Like, so when people are saying artificial intelligence in modern lexicon, they're usually referring to some combination of 5 technologies. So they're talking about the analysis of human language. So ChatGPT is a large language model. It is, at the end of the day, just solving puzzles where words are the atomic units of those puzzles, and sentences and paragraphs build from there. And meaning is inherent between all of that. There's analysis of images and video. We usually call that computer vision. So anything from security cameras that turn to face the thing that looks most like a human, to knowing how many cans of soup are on a shelf based on how many have walked past the cash register or something like that. There's algorithmic UX and UI, which is like actually probably the most useful term in here is human computer interaction, because it speaks to a lot of stuff that is very far afield from each other, but are related via them involving a human controlling a computer. This is the field I feel the greatest affinity for, probably. There's data extrapolation. So like synthetic data is largely what this is being called now, but if you have some data and you want more data that looks like it, if you have an image and you want to see what a computer might anticipate is just outside the field of view of the camera, that's data extrapolation. It's generative AI. And then there's these recurrent training algorithms. And that's machine learning. And there's actually a field of mathematics that has come into existence between our last slide and the slides moving forward. In like the 70s, we started getting what was called mathematical learning. And it's just a class of algorithms that are capable of carrying a variable into their next iteration. I think most of us are probably interested in like 2024 and moving forward in this regard. So I think and this could all change like tomorrow. Like there could be a press release tomorrow that's like, oh, everything's different now. You don't really know anything. But like right now, AI is like approximately like graduate student level and much faster in pattern recognition, continuation of patterns, quick informal reference searches. That's kind of now that we have web search capacity in language models. Translating information between formats. Here's a poem. Can you turn it into a song? Can you turn it into a painting? Can you turn it into a letter? And translating information into simple programming. Really good at all that. The programming thing is like this whole other topic, but it's pretty good at it. It's taken a huge jump in the last 3 years. Right now, AI is not very good at extrapolation and reasoning. So taking two fully oppositional ideas or partially oppositional ideas and finding a synthesis. Not very good at that. Or extrapolating. And there's all these like riddles that you can ask language models that kind of give away that it has theory of mind, but doesn't have like understanding of possession, and certain sentence structures confuse it and stuff. And sometimes it can be a little hard to tell like, oh, is it confused by the language or the reasoning? It seems usually like right now the reasoning portion is what it's really missing. And these tools are not built at all for decision making. Like trying to get a language model to help you decide where to go to dinner, like that problem that every couple has where you can't land on a restaurant. Like the language model is highly sycophantic. It does not want to disagree with you. You need to really talk it into opposition with you. And constructive stuff can come from that, but it's not really what these tools are built for. So I want to continue along that short history, a specific subset of computing, but I'm going to move pretty quickly through some of these more contemporary ideas. As we move through those ideas, I think there are like a couple of really grand questions in artificial intelligence right now that sort of border on philosophy a little bit. And I don't know that I have answers. I know I do not have answers to these questions, but I would be really curious what y'all think about them. The first, I'll skip ahead a little here. The first of these questions is whether words and written language, given sufficient quantity of words and sufficient time and power for analysis, whether words can summarize all human thought, emotion, and reasoning. Because that is ultimately the experiment that we're engaged with in terms of large language models. We've already had several like threshold points that it was anticipated by founders of large language models and natural language processing, thinking that they could never be used for graphics, that they could never be used at first for like image extrapolation. Physics engines are now being built with language. So it's already, we're seeing some evidence that early suspicion on this topic was probably misguided. But man, it's really tough to say that like, if you know all the words and you know all the way the words are related to each other, that you can figure out everything about humans. Like that's a big jump. So that's our first question. Really curious if anyone has thoughts on that in the chat. And then our second question to kind of be pondering as we go through here is that question of extrapolation. So when can sufficient cataloging, retrieval, combination, and application of existing ideas constitute new, unique, emergent ideas in and of themselves? This is something we obviously give humans credit for doing. We issue new patents that are based on combinations of old patents. The combination of new ideas, when done by humans, we widely accept that those create new ideas. But it's a big barrier, both philosophically and actually technology-wise, for AI right now. So just be thinking about those things. I'm very happy to see responses in the chat there. Devin, do you want to do a pause here in case there's stuff in the chat we should mention before I
Yeah,
jump into
absolutely.
Eliza?
Yeah. I think this question about replication, is it possible for like original things to be created with AI, um, is a really interesting one. We have a couple of responses. One person sharing, no language cannot summarize a human experience in a complete and coherent way. Um, we have another person sharing in the chat. I don't know if I would have said it before using AI, but having used it extensively now, I think language can be much more limiting than images, diagrams, distances, color palettes, etc. Um, Another thought of if it could, we would only need one poem on grief, which is an interesting way to look at it. We have a question from Jay asking, Colin, are we also going to note the identity-based biases and systems of oppression built into AI, or is that something that you regard as you regard you regard as humans are bad at and it's replicated in AI?
Sam Altman has this great hand waving phrase he'll use called pre-existing societal issues, which is just like such a great way to not have to talk about how humans act. Yeah, no, when you train algorithms on the ways we behave, you will mirror all aspects of humans. And there's this big frontier. I have a slide about skepticism that's very late in this slide deck, so I don't think we'll probably make it there. There's this idea that you can align these models into, you can essentially let them self-referee themselves. And by putting sufficient avatars of human thought in a bottle together, they will moderate each other. And that is that's somewhere I am highly skeptical. I don't think hallucination is going to be a huge issue. I think there's pretty clear ways we fix hallucination, like the bad citations and stuff. But this is the topic that I have not heard how synthetic data solves this. Like synthetic from where? I would be really curious where we see those things get better or worse going forward. Cool. Well, thank you everybody for that feedback. And it looks like it's still coming in. So on our next check-in, hopefully we'll hear a little bit more about your thoughts on those big questions. A sentinel moment in the history of chatbots is Eliza. Eliza is developed in 1965 by Joseph Weizenbaum at MIT. And actually, he was developing a programming language that Eliza was just a demo for, but it was so effective right away. The idea of personification of user interfaces. It was just rule-based prompts, rule-based algorithm, which means it was following predefined rules to simulate conversation. And it was very, very effective, at least in part because it was novel at the time. So when we were talking about like the idea of secrecy, this is a case where if Eliza did not refer to itself as a human and use kind of tricks of human-like language, it's very possible Eliza would not have been as effective at the time. As we moved into the 80s and 90s, the field of natural language processing evolved with the introduction of, from mathematics, probabilistic Markov chains. Markov chains are super complicated. And I spent like years of my life realizing I'm bad at math because I didn't really get them well enough. But in the image here, you can see an analogy. So like a robot car has these three states where it can be cool, it can be warm, or it can become overheated, in which it cannot escape back to the other two states. And it can take two actions. It can go slow and it can go fast. And each action leads to a transition to a new state. And each one has certain probabilities and rewards, probabilities of it falling into other states, rewards of getting to move forward and score points. And this is an example of how you could use a Markov chain here for this scenario, and use like reward carrot stick based systems to train the algorithm to perform in the way that you'd like it to match the desired outcomes the most often. Very human-like way of thinking, and kind of becomes the basis for neural networks. Here's some 90s web lore. I came online in 1998. I came I came online in the world in 1990. I got online on a computer in 1998. So these are some things that I kind of know by association. But 1993, World Wide Web Wanderer, you get a indexer that's crawling around the web and sort of crawling around in the darkness and just trying all sorts of different numbers to see if there are sites hosted there. And clicking links on those sites to find more sites, and it exposes most of the web. So suddenly there was a map of the web. Within 5 years, that technology becomes 3 different search engines, which all lose to Google in 1998, and from between 98 and the burst of the dot-com bubble, really. If y'all remember T9 texting, I was so good at T9 texting. I could stand at the I had to manage the rope at the place where I worked. I would let people in. I would just like watch them come in and watch them go out. In my pocket, I was able to T9 text my friends and glance at the screen every now and then. That prediction of what word you're about to say is actually neural networks. And they were so simple, and they had such a limited vocabulary that they were able to render that trained model on very, very low memory hardware. So I think I've never known how to say this company's name. Tegic Communications had the patent for T9 text. And then there's another company that was doing it at the same time. Get digital cameras in this period. I grew up in Kodak Park in Rochester, New York. So I knew a lot of people who were working on and shipping and working in the warehouses for the Kodak DC40. And that is largely credited with like the buildup of digital images online that allows something like, I think iPhoto had face recognition in 2002, and that's trained almost entirely off of these early digital photos. You get dictation in there. IBM Via Voice eventually sells to Dragon Naturally Speaking and gets wrapped into that product, and then it becomes an open standard, I believe. And that was pretty effective by 99. And in 98, the whole world changes, and Google applies essentially that Markov chain that we were looking at earlier to the process of web search. So whenever a link would get clicked, it would score a point, and scoring points made you more likely to get clicked, and it becomes a feedback loop. And like anyone who's been online for like the 25 years after that sees where that all went, right? Like ads started really overwhelming the actual search. And once you start getting a little ad reinforcement, the reason people are buying those ads is so they go up in page rank. Then they don't need the ad anymore, and then Google needs to charge more, and it leads to kind of a degrading effect, right? So that's kind of a concern to have as we move forward with some of these same rules. Guys, I want this slide in the presentation, but I don't really want to talk about it. So I'm putting this up here for anyone who might be watching the video later. These are some really useful terms to Google and read about. And they're all present in the early search period. And then they become really precedent for like that Bayesian era of like social media suggestion of like, if you like, then you'll love, that, you know, put us all into different tribes online, and has a lot of sort of rabbit holing effect of this person really likes videos about fish. I'm going to keep showing them videos about fish. People who like fish really like boats. I'm going to keep showing the boats. Now they only ever interact with one part of web content. You start getting systems that fall apart because of some of these rules. But in case anyone's interested in some of the mathematics behind this. And then Web 2.0, you know, often referred to now. I think we have kind of rose-colored glasses about Web 2.0. But you get the Wikipedia launch. You know, it fundamentally changes how we access and share knowledge publicly. Very funny story. By the way, go look up the story on how Wikipedia became open source. They actually were a corporation. They really wanted to be a corporation. They really needed free labor. And that, again, rhymes with a lot of the history of the web that comes after that. Git is maybe the single most impactful code builder improvement of my lifetime. It allows version control. In 2006, you get Amazon Web Services up and running. Obviously, their competitors like DigitalOcean as well. And that makes the act of hosting a website much simpler. And you no longer need to possess hardware that is capable of hosting thousands of websites in order to host only one. You could instead buy usage of a partition of that hardware. And then, you know, the thing that most excites me about the internet is open standards. And so the open web API era is really exciting for that. Twitter takes off in large part because people could build applications right in Twitter by using their web API and grab data from other places, like, and then build responsivity. Like a lot of those single, I'm sure everyone had a Twitter account that was useful to them for one single thing back in the day, like is blank open, and it would just check their hours online and post the tweet or whatever. But that's all web API stuff. Okay, I was watching a Stephen Wolfram talk yesterday. I love Stephen Wolfram. I used Mathematica a ton when I was doing my early math explorations, but I also find it hilarious that I took 78% of the words off of this chart, and it's still pretty confusing. But it does refer to this kind of chain of complexity that we see emerge again and again, where simple geometric elements, a loop that recurs, can often become slightly probabilistic with like differential equations, and then you can predict the next little bit based on what you've just seen, and you repeatedly keep doing that, and you actually get a pretty good prediction. We talked about rule-based like Eliza earlier, where there's just a simple, really flow chart of decision making, and you're just flowing through like that. And now we really enter that multi-computational era, to where it's probabilities nested in within probabilities, nested within probabilities, you know. So just as you're looking at some of these systems, you might see that pattern emerge, and you're not imagining it. And then finally, the era we are just rising out of right now, it feels like, to where these neural networks hit the web again. In 2007, mobile web browsing becomes a thing. Really, I mean, people were on Blackberries, but they weren't browsing mobile specific sites. And within, I think it's like 8 years, they become 2/3 of the web in mobile devices, something like that. And it's hovered up near 80. It's taken a step back recently, but it hovered up 80, 85% for a long time. You get GitHub version control without needing to run actual Git on your machine in the same way. Wolfram Alpha, I think, is often overlooked as one of the very early, highly useful large language models. It's kind of unbelievable how good it was. The amount of reasoning it was doing. I sometimes wonder if it's just that it was only serving a very small community, and that's why I feel like it was as good as it was. But the things they were doing with language models back then are pretty amazing. And I think we all know that Sentinel moment where IBM Watson won on Jeopardy. It's, I think, a lot of people's first time seeing how language models behave. And then you're off to the races, essentially, at that point. You get TensorFlow, which allows you to do machine learning right in the browser. Ostensibly, it's not really that simple, but it allows a quick startup for point a camera at something and know what's going on. A lot of my early AI work was with TensorFlow. You get image creation, and if you're going to read one AI paper ever, read Attention is All You Need by Ashish Vaswani. It's the most important AI paper I think ever published, probably, or at least in the last 20 years. It invents transformer architecture. It introduces transformer architecture, and that's essentially the secret sauce to most of the deep brain stuff that Google was doing. Everything uses transformers now, including some of the language models we see here coming out after 2017 as these tools get integrated into real functionality. And then I think at this point, this is the moment we're in right here, to where text becoming images happens in 3 seconds, and we all act like it's normal. Just because an image doesn't have enough pixels to tell what's going on doesn't mean you can't go create those pixels. There's things about computing that I think we've all needed to like destroy the part of our brain that says, oh, you can't do that. There's things that computers can do with speed right now that were absolutely impossible 4 years ago. And that gets us to that feel like you're walking the wrong way on a treadmill sometimes, right? I thought this number was crazy. The best approximation I could find of cumulative AI spending in 2024 was $500 billion. Global pharma is only a $1.3 trillion business, and AI has a 20% year-over-year increase in that number. So by like 2030, AI, not like computer science or chip manufacture, just like AI training and the upkeep of these machines, the energy costs, which is a huge issue, that will surpass even like global auto sales and manufacturer industry. So it's big enough now to tank the economy or something, right? So it's really here. So here's another moment. Sorry for the ranting about computing history for as long as I did, but I do think it's useful sometimes to like really look at the map and see where we are on it, where we're on that arc. So this is where I think many of you will know things I do not know about this. So what do you think about all this? What do you think's the biggest thing I missed? Is there anything that you remember feeling like it was going to be the next big thing, or like it was going to change everything and now it doesn't feel like that? Is there anything that you look back and you say, how do I not remember that coming out? I definitely have tools like that. Yeah, kind of curious what y'all think. Cool. Well, I'm gonna, oh yeah, here we go. Some responses.
We have wit sharing. I think that the main concern with AI is that it is going to be disruptive enough to change the job market for humans. And Andrea sharing big changes equal fear for some.
Yeah, I hate that analogy about cars and horses. Like I think that's so condescending. Like whenever somebody starts talking about that, it's like um yeah, maybe if 80% of the United States was 4 years or something. Like so yeah, I think all of us I would really like to meet somebody who does any intellectual work, which is I think like 99% of people, does work that is not fully route, just the same thing. It's very established and optimized already. Again, I think I'm describing 99% of people. Um, I'd like to meet the person who isn't a little bit afraid of like, I like my job, I like doing my job, I'm doing it for a reason, and now you're going to change it because yeah, I get very disappointed by some of the condescension behind. I'm obviously somebody who's pretty excited about all this stuff, but um it shows a real misunderstanding of other humans, which isn't like surprising for tech industry, I don't think. But it does fail to reckon with the fear of loss of something that you can't really get back or you can't recapture that moment.
There also seems to be kind of this tension also with the idea of like autumn sharing, thinking of something we thought would take off and change everything, but hasn't necessarily. I think of Bitcoin as an example.
Yeah. Yeah. And Bitcoin's a great example of like a technology that is valuable. Like as an encryption technology, like blockchain is very powerful. It's really cool. And it just getting turned into the worst version of it right away. And it filling a gap that could have been filled by open standards. We had this moment where W3C declined to put payment into the web browser as an open standard. And then you just get kind of the worst version of an exciting reality, right? I think that's absolutely something we will see. Like I keep coming back to the future's already here. It's just not evenly distributed. And when I've always been surprised we haven't seen more of a foothold for micro lenders, like systemic micro lenders in the Western Hemisphere, really. There's payday lenders, but they're not nearly as systemic as they are in other places in the world. But I think you could absolutely see some industries that just couldn't cut it because of labor costs, and it's good that they can't cut it because they're predatory. Suddenly be able to automate themselves into existence. That's something I'm scared of. I see a note here about librarians in the future. I think librarians are a highly futuristic career. That's just me. We are like the original information workers in many ways. We are ourselves like information Sherpas, right? And just because people are trying to go up that mountain more often, and it's slightly easier, doesn't mean that our work can't be interesting. I really like the parts of my job that deal with people and them, in my case, making stuff. And making stuff means a lot of different things in lots of different fields of that librarians support and libraries support. I think it'll probably go both ways, right? Like you're going to get some very cheap to maintain, not really very user centric information portals that are completely automated. But I also think that people who have high reasoning literacy, that's like the skill that automation has not shown any sign that it's coming for, is captchas have fallen apart. Like captchas don't work anymore. But like the reasoning portion is the thing that they are trying to reify in the new version of how you tell whether someone is a human or not. I'll just throw it out there. Free way to become a trillionaire. If anybody is on this call who knows the solution to this, there is a $1 trillion business that does not currently exist, or it's not currently doing this work, that is purely around authentication of data online. It is going to become, it has already been a bubbling problem. I'm sure librarians, I'm preaching to the choir here, are out misinformation, information literacy, intentional disinformation. But we are headed like from the frying pan into the fryer on this one. And any verification of information, be it via blockchain or something else, is going to become a massive industry.
We have a question here from Lynn. I wonder about confidentiality when asking AI questions. Can AI apps be used without logging in or providing personal info?
So the distinction there is primarily between cloud-hosted AI systems and local systems. Cloud systems, because of those steps that were taken during Web 2.0 and the pre-existing infrastructure, and also how easy it is to take information from you as it moves through that tunnel, are way ahead. So all of OpenAI's tools all expect that they are running on their infrastructure. And the unlikely champion that we have is, and I'm sure his motivations are completely legitimate, is Mark Zuckerberg, who won't shut up about how much he loves local AI. And so Meta is trying to take that corner. We'll see where it goes. But being able to run things on the device that's in the room with you is a complete game changer. And the place where it's probably data security is one place that it's, like light years ahead. But also in terms of environmental factors, cloud computing is really expensive to keep up. Like the internet chugs a lot of water and carbon, and AI is making it much worse, as I'm sure we all know. But that's largely those cloud servers. So it'll be interesting to see if we kind of become a distributed, if people are running servers like in their like house, like what kind of power grid impacts there are for that. But it's the only way to kind of keep the data bottled up.
We have a question here about monetization. So Tyler sharing, I wonder about monetization. It seems like a lot of generative AI companies are losing money right now with freely available services. Will their way of providing return on investment be as simple as a subscription fee or hosting ads, or something more complex or even insidious?
I don't know if y'all saw that OpenAI, their burn rate right now has them going bankrupt like next June. So yeah, software as a service kind of failed in lots of ways, like in the last decade. Like companies continually like struggle to get off of VC funding because they're using software as a service models. And the idea that the most expensive type of computing ever put together is going to be able to be supported with like small, you won't even notice it, oh, it's just Spotify, like software as a service, like stuff, like it's video streaming or something. Like literally Netflix, one of the reasons they needed to increase their subscription costs is because it takes a lot of money to keep those servers up and running how they do, and they're nothing compared to these other services. So yeah, they're all completely being bankrolled by venture capital right now, or they have pre-existing, just they print money like Alphabet. So yeah, I don't know the answer to that one, but it is a very it's a good thing to keep your eye on, because that rug could get pulled really quickly in the way that I think a lot of people feel that with those video streaming solutions or with workspace hosting and things like that, it's been pulled out under them.
There's a question from Autumn here sharing, what is a reputable professional AI certification we could get, or that you know of, thinking this could dispel some of the fear around AI at work if I'm certified in something related to it?
I think that's a good thought. Man, there's a lot of snake oil right now. I think some of the primary providers have some pretty interesting stuff. Google, like for a lot of their other failings, some of their certifications, especially in like web development, have been very good over the last decade here. I think they're doing some really cool stuff around their machine learning. They are such a funny beast with how many cool, smart people they have working for them, and then their products don't always reflect it, but their trainings do, I think, sometimes. But if I know a lot of us here are probably on some listservs in different communities, I always appreciate when these training programs that people have actually gone through, that they feel positively about, that they pass those along, because I hear a lot more of the other opinion right now. And man, I would, it's hard enough putting together all summer. I've kind of been keeping a notebook of things I wanted to talk about with y'all, and I've been crossing out things like, oh, that's not relevant anymore, or circling things that suddenly really matter. I can't imagine trying to put together a curriculum on these topics right now. But if you do find anything, I'd really like to know about it.
We have Eleanor asking if you could show the name of the author of the article, Attention is All You Need.
Yes. Ashish Vaswani, I believe. Make sure. Yeah. Yeah, and that whole, there are other authors on that paper as well, and all of their careers are fascinating. And they're the real rock stars of AI. To be honest, it's the people making the data and the people making the algorithms. It's not Sam Altman. Cool. Well, I have a couple more just little tips, things I'm keeping my eye on. I totally invite other chats. Devin, please interrupt me if people have thoughts. I want to show a couple things so I mentioned I run a business outside of my work here at State. And so my partners and we are constantly kind of reminding each other of these best practices that we've learned through our work with AI and using it to support making stuff. And one of them is a very old rule. So HITL means human in the loop. I believe that actually the team at MIT might have come up with that acronym, but in the 60s. And then it was essentially used for training, the idea that you can give up a human's time in equal portion to a computer's time if it means the computer runs more effectively and doesn't have to get stopped at things it can't solve. But now we use it kind of as a design standard. Interactive generative tools unequivocally enhance human capacity. I think there's a lot of research out there. If you're looking for another good paper, by the way, this Noy and Zhang paper is awesome. The experimental evidence on the productivity effects of generative artificial intelligence. It's very even-handed. It has a really cool section in it that talks about how well the AI-assisted students are performing the task, and then failings to their understanding, and that one question in their survey exposed that most of the participants were actually just copy and pasting entire answers from ChatGPT. And that's why they were scoring highly, or that's what they suspect. And that's kind of one of the reasons to remain at the wheel here. There are significant indications that there are systemic issues with these technologies in terms of their ability to keep users engaged between responses, and that users become very complacent over long periods of using them. I will confess, I had a period last year where I was becoming very complacent using LLM tools towards my software development, and bad code was making it into my work, and I needed to enforce better verification to prevent that. And that's part of having a scientific approach, right? You can have your emphasis on experiential learning and experimentation, but it's very important that you are using your documentation to actually assess yourself. So I think those are, if I had 3 rules, I would tell you all to remain at the wheel, be very engaged, be very over the shoulder, micromanage your LLM, be kind of a bad boss. Like, you don't have to be the boss to a language model that you would want to work for. You can be kind of demanding. Try to be scientific, using a scientific method wherever you can, and that those outcomes should lead to documentation where you could walk away from your machine and explicitly say what you have learned from that conversation. And I have an example here of the kind of documentation that I personally make for myself. I try to make very comprehensive documents about topics that I even feel like I think I know more about my company than anybody else besides my business partners. And yet I have a 9-page document. It'll be longer soon, that talks about every project we've ever completed. It says basic details about the skills of my partners, things they like doing, things they don't like doing. And whenever I'm working with a language model and treating it like a consultant on my business, I feed these documents through it. So here's one. I have one about our branding. I have one about our financials. I have like a couple of key documents that I really, they are our product, I think. I kind of treat them like the Coke formula a little bit, right? Like, there's lots of good colas, guys. Like, RC Cola is pretty good, actually. Like, but Coca-Cola, that is the product, is that sheet of paper that says what goes into that every vat. And I think you should think of your own processes in that way too. I see the number has gone up in the chats down at the bottom. I want to be conscientious of time here.
We have a question. Any great prompts you'd suggest for ChatGPT? Yeah.
I have good rules for prompts. I mentioned Ethan Mollick earlier, Mollick, who's at Wharton. He and another author who has his same last name published a paper in spring of last year that is about how to structure prompts for instruction. And one of the pieces of advice they give is always start with a premise. Kind of treat the LLM like an actor, and tell it what kind of person is responding to me, and what way do they talk. And then you say the goal, and then you say any contextual understanding, and then you reiterate the goal. Because, and also, if a conversation with an LLM does not feel like it's going well, there's a chance you have poisoned the thread. There's really unpredictable priming with language models right now. There's a study out that if you tell a language model what NFL team you root for, that its responses change. And the specific paper was dealing with when ChatGPT will cut off conversations for safety reasons, and that certain fan bases it will cut off earlier. Their thing was about buying rare plants, and the language model suspecting that you are trying to defeat some law about the import-export of plants or something. And they were saying that Philadelphia Eagles fans get away with everything, and LA Chargers fans get cut off right away. And who knows what those are actually correlating to? It could be something like we mentioned earlier in the conversation, pretty sinister. There could be different demographics for those fan bases. I don't know. I don't really follow football. But when you're having conversations with the language model, keep in mind that every conversation starts from a blank spot, and then you can never get it back to blank. So starting the new thread is like probably the most powerful thing I can suggest. I wanted to use the graphics from the NFL talk so bad, guys. They have all the little team logos. They have this bar chart that makes no sense. I really wanted to include it, but I got to tell you about it at least. And thank you, Tyler, for dropping that name in there. I'm happy to answer any other questions. I forget if my next slide has my contact information again, but I don't think I'm that hard to find online. I'd be very happy to hear from any of you via email, Discord, either in my inboxes. I really appreciate everyone's attention. I know this is a topic we all probably feel like we're in Groundhog Day hearing people talk about it time and time again, but it really might be the most interesting thing happening on Earth right now, and the thing that will impact the most unexpected things very soon. It's not the most important thing happening on Earth. Like I'm not making that claim, but it might be the single most interesting thing to just stare at as it changes. And I'd really encourage everybody to be a participant in it, however you can. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Colin. Folks, any questions? We have a few minutes left.
I knew there was a slide I wanted to make sure I showed. I'll let it idle here for the sake of the recording and everything. And if anyone has questions about how AI was used in this presentation, happy to answer those too.
We have Kristen asking if you could explain item number 2 on the slide.
Yeah. The Socratic method is a question-based instructional method. When I learned about the Socratic method, I think I always rolled my eyes at it and said, like, yeah, that sounds great if you're, Socrates or Plato and you have a one-on-one teacher relationship with somebody who's brilliant. And now we all kind of do. So I often will prompt a language model to only ask questions. And I'll give it a training of like a PDF, like one of those documents that I would put together on a topic. I always start notebook, then make a PDF, and then I go to language model so it doesn't cloud my thinking too much. And I'll ask it to only ask me questions or say, could your next 10 responses be questions? And it'll forget a couple in, and I'll remind it it's only supposed to be asking questions. It's very useful for doing the divergent part. I saw a question pop up around subscriptions. One of the reasons I have a business is so I can not feel bad about all the subscriptions to AI services that I have. I think ChatGPT is just like the best $20 I spend every month. The number of places I think I consistently make the $20 back just from access to that kind of quick reference in my pocket. The thing I suggest to everybody, and I think it's going to be pretty prominent now, they just had a huge release, but Runway ML, I have their unlimited yearly video generation subscription. It's the most expensive, probably the most expensive subscription I subscribe to. And I get a lot of value out of it. It appeared a couple places in this presentation for turning images into GIFs. Included that there, but yeah, those are the two that I'm currently paying for. And if you have the ability through your EDU to get free stuff, our friend Colin Nichols here is very good at reminding me that we sometimes get subscriptions to these services. So if you're a Microsoft campus, you might already have access to Copilot. You might have access to GitHub Copilot, which is a in your VS Code paired programming assistant, which is pretty great.
Awesome. Well, Colin, are you okay with in the follow-up email, me sharing your contact info for folks to reach out afterwards?
Absolutely. And I'll say my email address here just for the recording. I'm at cpkeena2@ncsu.edu or Colin, COLIN, @mtrmagicKey.com.
Awesome. Thanks again. This just brought up so many different questions and rabbit holes to go down. So thank you so much. All right, folks. We'll have a great rest of your Thursday afternoon and keep an eye out for an email from me tomorrow with the slides, a feedback survey, and the recording. Please share in the feedback survey any sort of comments that you have, ideas for future NC Live webinars. That's a great way for us to kind of guide our training program. We really want to make sure that we hear from you and make training that's responsive to what you're interested in and your needs. All right. Thank you all so much. Take care.